will be posting this to YouTube and also sending it out to everybody who registered for the event. So we have a raise hand button. You are free to use it if you need clarification during the presentation. We also have the chat function, and I encourage you to use that and put any questions you might have in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. I'll also put a JDRF contact email address in the chat function if anyone has any questions or feedback that they want to deliver tomorrow or later in the week. And without further ado, I would now like to introduce our speaker tonight. Tonight, we will be hearing from Dr. Anne-Marie McDonald, JDRF's National Manager of Research, Programs and Communications, currently on maternity leave. Dr. McDonald is a passionate medical and wellness expert with a deep interest in advanced medical knowledge and rehabilitation, diabetes, exercise medicine, and preventative medicine. Anne has been living with type 1 diabetes herself since she was 4 years old and is the mom to a busy toddler and a 6-month-old baby. And she will be available to answer any of your questions at the end of her presentation. And with that, I turn it over to you, Anne. And you're muted. I'm gonna. Sorry. And you've got to unmute yourself.
There we go. Oh, now I can see everyone. That's so nice. Hi, everyone. Let me go back to my sharing my slides. You can hear me now, Ruth?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. So let's go back here. Let's make this nice and big for everyone. So like Ruth said, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. You can put the question in the chat as well. I want to try and keep this as interactive as possible. Of course, I do have some content that I want to share with you, but please do feel free to ask me any questions or provide comments or feedback throughout. So we're going to talk today about how to stay healthy in the summer. Like Ruth said, I've been living with type 1 myself for over 30 years now. So I have some knowledge and some experience when it comes to some of the challenges that we can face, either as individuals living with type 1 or as parents who manage their children's health. I want to thank Dexcom, of course, they're supporting us tonight for our presentation. And Ruth, please stop me if there's any comments or questions, because I can't see the Q&A box. So a little about JDRF. I imagine that you know the organization relatively well. The organization was founded in 1970 in the US by passionate parents of children with T1D. In Canada, we began 4 years later in 1974. And our mission really remains the same. It's really to be the leading global organization when it comes to funding promising type 1 diabetes research. We not only focus our funds on research for a cure, but we also recognize that type 1 is a chronic condition that we live with 24/7. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting researchers and studies that look at ways to either prevent the conditioning from happening in the first place, but also improving different treatments, right? So looking at whether it's improving quality of life, improving our mental health, looking at ways to decrease complications as well. So all of that kind of falls under our umbrella when it comes to our mission and our vision. In terms of just a little bit of background before I jump into the summer theme, background in terms of where we put our dollars, about 70% of our funding does go towards cure-based research. That really is where we want to focus our funds, of course. But like I said, recognizing that as a 24/7 disease, we also want to make sure that we are supporting improving lives, right? So about 30% of our fundraising dollars go towards improving lives. Improving lives sounds quite, quite general, right, as a bucket, and it is. It can mean anything from a new drug therapy, better devices, whether that's better technologies, better blood sugar monitors, better CGMs. Today, of course, with the Dexcoms and the Libres, with the tandem pumps, with all of this really, really great technology, living with type 1 has become a lot easier. Next is our focus on access for all. You may have heard of this campaign. Here, we really want to make sure that we're partnering with important government officials and departments, as well as insurance companies, to provide access to all of the medications, all of the technologies, the insulin pumps, the CGMs, that we can to all Canadians living with type 1. It is a bit of an uphill battle and a bit of a slow process, but we are committed to making sure that we can get everyone get their hands on what they need for the best results when it comes to their management. And then the last 2 points are, focusing on new therapies and new treatments, right? Science is very, very slow, but it does progress. And so as long as we're moving forwards in the right direction, that's a good sign. And then the last one, making sure that we have investments, of course, in T1D research, the best research, whether that's in Canada or globally. In terms of T1D in Canada, just a couple of notes. I imagine you know kind of the biology of type 1 diabetes, and perhaps if you or your child is a newly diagnosed type 1, there's a lot of questions that you may have. It is an autoimmune disease. The pancreas, where the insulin is produced by the beta cells, is attacked, so it's a bit of a self-attack, unfortunately. We know that there are both genetic and environmental elements at play when it comes to triggering the onset of the disease, but we're still trying. Researchers are really trying to figure out and pinpoint what exactly is the trigger and what exactly causes type 1. And that research falls under that kind of preventative care that I spoke with. How can we prevent this disease from happening in the first place? You have to, of course, monitor your blood sugars constantly, right? Day and night. You have to take external insulin. That's kind of the mainstay treatment, the only treatment. And it's not a cure. And we emphasize that quite a lot, that insulin is not a cure for type 1 diabetes. It's just a treatment, right, to live our day-to-day lives. And of course, we have to be mindful that there are many complications that can exist. We do our best every day to manage the condition, but there are, of course, risks when it comes to especially small blood vessels. So in the eyes, in the kidneys, in the limbs, so in your legs and your arms. And the last point here, really, there's nothing you can do to prevent type 1, and I think that's important to stress. And like I said, at present, no cure. In Canada, the rate is growing slightly. We're not sure why. There is some research looking into this, but we do know that research works. In the last 50 years, we've had actually 25 years added on to the lifespan of an individual living with type 1 who is receiving, the latest care. So, nowadays that would be someone kind of taking advantage of the different technologies, the different insulins that help them with their treatment. And in Canada, there are approximately 300,000 individuals living with type 1 diabetes, which may or may not surprise me. I think it's a fairly hefty number, right? There's a lot of people in our community, which also means a lot of support. And so if you're newly diagnosed, I definitely recommend a great first step to be here tonight. And I recommend you look into other opportunities to connect with type 1. Okay. Enough of the background. Let's move on to summer. So I'm based in Toronto, in Oakville. It's quite hot today. It's a beautiful summer day. But of course, summer can mean different things to different people. With type 1 especially, it means that we have some more challenges. So I would love to hear from you when you think of summer, whether it's for your child who lives with type 1, whether it's for you if you're a youth, if you're retired, if you're a working adult with a busy family life. What is it about summer that makes it both special and challenging? Feel free to type it in. Ruth can share some of the answers with me, and then I'll share mine. Give you, I don't know, 30 seconds or so if you want to share what's most challenging for you, and then I'll keep that in mind as well as I continue the talk.
Wait, Anne, we did have a question already from, I think it's Tanya, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. She does a lot of camping and backcountry camping, and she's wondering kind of like, I guess, glucose products she could bring into the tent that aren't going to attract animals in case she goes low.
Yes, that's a great question. I've done some backcountry camping out west, and I know you have bear hangs, and you don't really want your low supplies to be in a bag up in a tree when you're low at 2 a.m., right? But you also don't want a bear in your tent. So I think anything that it has a very tight seal, and although it's not the easiest, if you can keep the seals closed until you actually need it when you're low, And I say, it can be difficult because, as we all know, if we have a low blood sugar, it's hard sometimes to kind of open the plastic or take the straw out, etc. So I would say anything with a very good seal that you keep closed, keep it in many either Ziploc bags, or if you have a dry bag, something that's difficult to access. You can keep it in your sleeping bag or in your pillowcase, depending how you camp. But I don't have any, perfect solutions for that. But I do know that you do want to have something on hand, right?
So we've got some answers here, which I think people will be pleased with because we do cover most of this in the presentation. So there's
few
travel, change of routine, confusion from what's heat symptoms and what's a hypo symptom. Sarah says, my son is newly diagnosed at 15. He's a lifeguard. Keeping insulin cool is something they're concerned with. The heat, schedule disruption, and a lot of how to keep insulin cool, how to prevent lows in the heat, and traveling internationally with T1D, and keeping your devices on in the heat when you're sweaty and
and they tend to come off, right? Especially if you're active or live somewhere where it's humid. Okay, wonderful. Those are great responses. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. So I think you've kind of shared everything that I was going to mention as well. So lack of routine, of course, is a big one, whether it's for a child or for an adult as well when it comes to vacations. Change of environment, right? Are you at home now all day? Is your child at home? Are they less active? Are they more active? Are they at a summer vacation? Are they at a vacation or at a summer camp, for example? Change in weather is a given, change in activity level. I'll talk about exercise. Different social situations. I think that's one that maybe was not mentioned, but we often have more birthday parties, more social outings, and that can cause a bit of a challenge when it comes to our blood sugars. Accessing medicine, so accessing insulin if we go abroad, not just abroad, even if we leave our city and we forget our insulin, do we know how to access insulin or some of our low supplies in different cities, for example, or different provinces. Dealing with sweat or wet environments, of course, if you're someone or if your child loves to be in the pool all summer, right, that might be a little bit of a scary situation at first because you might not know how to keep those Dexcom and those pump sites on. And then the last one is, different caregivers, kind of goes along with change of environment, right? But let's say your child is out of school, you're working, maybe your grandparent or your parent takes over care. Do you have to perhaps educate them, give them a little booklet, create a little, I don't know, PowerPoint or PDF, if you will. But that's definitely something to keep in mind. So I'm going to touch on most of these. But I did want to have them here just for your consideration, that there really are a lot of things that we have to think about. And the best thing you can do with all of these is to prepare and plan prior to any change, right? To the best of your knowledge. Of course, it's hard to do at all times. So the first thing is travel considerations. And I have this great diagram taken from Michael Riddell. He's a researcher out of York University in Toronto. And he speaks a lot about, he studies rather athletes with type 1 diabetes. And one thing that he looked at was, on top of the actual activity, whether it be a race or a tournament, what are all the other factors when it comes to travel? And these are all applicable for, whether you're a professional athlete or not, anyone really living with type 1 who's traveling. Again, just a few points here that I want to make when it comes to considerations. Risking losing your baggage. Most of you probably already know that it's best to keep all of your medicine, all your supplies on you in your carry-on bag. You can, and I have this, I think, in my next slide, you can ask your doctor to write you a note if you're worried that in security they might not let you through with, liquids, for example, but you shouldn't have a problem if you have a note from your doctor. When it comes to meals on board, you can find yourself with very different foods with no nutritional information, so just be aware of that. If you're anxious about that, you can always, bring your own meal, buy a meal at the airport before boarding the flight. And make sure, of course, you have lots of low supplies that you're familiar with you. Generally, I say if you're packing for a trip, you don't necessarily need to go completely overboard. Like, I don't want you to have, a huge carry-on with all of your things, all your low supplies, but make sure you have, twice as much as you may need, for example. Your insulin pump, generally speaking, should be fine with the change of pressure. Occasionally, there are some studies that say that the pressure change causes insulin to be pushed out a little bit from the tube. I would say check with your healthcare provider if they know of any issues with your pump. But like I said, that's very rare, but it can potentially happen, which would mean that you would be given a touch more insulin and perhaps go a touch lower. So just good to monitor your blood sugars as always, right? And then a couple other things I want to mention down below. If your flight's delayed, right? So just be aware that it happens, especially nowadays in the busy summer season, and be prepared, have extra snacks, extra access to insulin with you. Jet lag, I'll talk about in a little more detail, I think in the next slide. And then storing insulin, I'll talk about also a little bit further down, because I know that's something that came up for many of you. So jet lag, tips for jet lag. So this actually I didn't have in my presentation initially, and then someone last night asked it. I delivered this in French, and I thought, oh, that's a great topic. I should definitely include it. So first and foremost, if you have an insulin pump, I would say make sure you change the time on the pump. If you're going anywhere that's less than 3 hours away, the recommendation usually is that you can kind of get away with not really changing your insulin dosage. It's a small enough time change. If it's more than 3 hours, then you most likely will have to change your insulin requirements. And one way to kind of look at it is if you're going east, if you're flying to Europe, your day will be shorter, right? Your travel day will be shorter. And so you most likely will need less insulin versus if you're going west and your day will be longer, your travel day will be longer. Then you actually might need a bit more insulin. It's of course individual, but generally speaking, on an insulin pump, if you change the time, you should be okay. Just make sure that during that period, you're really paying attention to your blood sugars, whether through a CGM or by testing. Whereas if you're on insulin pens and you're using, or a syringe and you're using a long acting and a short acting, that's where you most likely will have to change your long-acting insulin, just because your day is either getting a lot shorter or a lot longer, right? So just something to be in mind, and definitely check in with your either physician or your nurse practitioner about how best to do that. Yeah.
Sorry, just before you continue to the next one, because I had a couple travel related questions here.
Yeah, let me go back.
One was, can the Dexcom/pump go through airport scanners? Like, does it set them off?
No, you can go through. Whether or not it sets it off, I think some might, but you can definitely go through it. They're safe to go through it. And if you're, like I said, if you're concerned, it's always, best to have a letter from your physician just to say, I need to have all my, diabetes supplies on me. Endocrinologists, they're very familiar with writing that letter. But yes, I don't remember which ones will go through. I imagine, if you have an insulin pump with a clip or whatnot, with a metal clip, right, that would beep. But so just be prepared that it might beep, and if so, they might ask you to show it to them, or they might use their little swab on it. But you can definitely go through with it.
And Ellen asked about, we know there was a Dex4 shortage, which I believe is being resolved as we speak, but in the meantime, it's back on the shelves. What would you recommend that can work as quickly that you could carry with you, like on a plane or in the airport?
For low supplies, I imagine. Yeah. I would say it's good to always have two different things. It's good to have a fast acting sugar, right? So something that's liquid will generally be absorbed faster. So whether that's, like a sports drink, like a Gatorade, or a fruit juice, that works fairly well. Candies, right? Simple sugars. If you look at something that has a package, if you look at the nutritional information, you just want to make sure that you have a good number of carbohydrates or glucose, right? Usually they recommend about 15 grams. Some researchers say it might have to be more than 15, closer to 20, but you kind of probably know what you need to go up from that low. And look at minimizing the protein and the fat. So anything that has too much protein and fat will take too long to absorb. So, something like a Skittle, right? Skittles will be faster. Little gummy candies will be faster to work. Versus like a Snickers bar, for example, that has, a lot of like that, like nougat, I don't know how you pronounce it, and peanut butter and, kind of fatty, also delicious foods, but, they won't act as fast. So candies, juices, yeah.
Sorry, just a few people are saying that the pumps and the Dexcoms, I'm assuming also a flash jam, shouldn't go through the scanner. I guess the one where they like kind of twirl your curl the thing around you so they can wand you, but you shouldn't
They
go
can.
through
Yeah, you can always ask.
that
Mhm.
scanner with them. I think that's what it says on the manufacturer's note. So they just,
Yep.
thank you to Ian and Stephanie and Beth who mentioned that in the chat. And then one last question, because someone has had their hand up. It
Sure.
hasn't posted in the chat, but she's had her hand up the whole time. So Misty, if you
Sure.
want to unmute yourself super quickly and then ask your question, and then we'll move on to the next section.
Okay. First thing, I
Hi.
can't find the chat. So like, I can't chat here. I can't do a
Oh,
chat.
that's okay.
My question:
That's okay.
How do you keep your insulin? I'm on long acting, and
Yeah.
how do I keep my insulin cool during the flight?
Yeah, so during the flight, if it's with you on the airline, right, in the cabin, it should be fine because that's kind of ambient room temperature.
Okay.
Is that what you meant? If you have it on you?
Yeah, like I have it
Yeah.
on. I usually keep my medication and everything with me.
Yeah.
My insulin, my pills, and everything with me on board. So if I just put my knapsack, it'll be nice and cool, so they won't.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a second. Were there any other Ruth questions about travel?
No, I
And
think
the
that
other
was.
thing,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
the other thing is about food. Like
Yeah.
for me, I'm a figure skater.
Okay.
I do other sports like softball in the summer and kayaking and some figure skating. I like to go back on the ice, but I'll see when I will go back on. What kind of thing do you suggest me to bring along? Because I work almost 8 hours at work, 8 hours during the day.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get low sugar. But I hate my sugar when it goes up to 9. A very few times it goes up to 9, I get upset about it.
Yeah, it's such a fine balance. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of nutritional strategies, but I always say have something that's fast acting and works really quick, but also make sure, especially if you're going, for longer periods of time when you're active, have something that has some sustenance to it. So something with protein or fat. So that could be anything from a peanut butter sandwich to, like I said, a Snickers bar. What's that?
Okay. Can you suggest, like, when I have a peanut butter, my sugar goes sky high. So I'm afraid to use peanut butter in anything.
Yeah, we can use, you can use, cheese that has protein and fat, right? If you want, just let me go through until I get to the nutrition slide. I think that'll be helpful for a lot of folks on the call as well. And you'll kind of maybe get a sense of what are some foods that might be helpful for you specifically. Okay. It is always quite individual, right? Which is a little bit, a little bit of a challenge, right, when it comes to type 1. But I hear what you say, and I know what you mean in terms of overcorrecting low too, right? Because we don't want to jump too high from overcorrecting low.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So a couple of things in terms of these are kind of the main tips when it comes to managing type 1 in the summer that I want to kind of highlight on one separate page. In terms of keeping cool, I want you to know that insulin actually, although it can be less effective in the heat, when we speak of heat, we're not talking about, a 25-degree sunny day. What we're talking about is having your insulin for prolonged periods of time in quite hot temperatures, so anywhere from like 35, 37 degrees Celsius. If you have your insulin in your insulin pump, it's fairly well insulated. You don't need to worry about that. If you have it, in your pen throughout the day and you're out and about and it's not, a heat wave in your city, you will be okay. So you don't have to always have something on hand in terms of a cooling, bag or device. But if, and I apologize, I forgot the name of the mom whose son is a lifeguard. If he's out in he or she, I think it's your son, right? If he's out in the sun, then, I would say, okay, he's most likely going to go through a few heat waves over the summer. He can look into, there's a company called Frio, F-R-I-O, and they make they're very simple. They're just like little cooling cases. They don't look like they're medical or anything. If he's concerned about that, I know adolescents often can be, but it's a little travel case, and that's something that can make sure that if he has a syringe or anyone else on the call has a syringe or a pen, right, you can use that. Otherwise, I would say just to try to plan ahead that if you are going to be hiking, if you're going to be on your bike in the heat, make sure that your insulin, whether in an insulin pump or if you're carrying an extra vial with you, that it's not in direct sunlight. So just kind of store it like with a Missy in your backpack, store it somewhere. Maybe instead of having it on the outside of your shorts, put it on the inside of your pocket, but you should be fine unless it's quite hot. Generally speaking, you do want to store your insulin, of course, in the fridge, right, at about 2 to 8 degrees. There are a few other cooling cases. This is one that I know that is most popular, but a quick Google search, I think you can find a few others as well. Pack extra supplies. I've kind of, I think, drilled that home already. Anticipate a low, right? So again, make sure that you have enough supplies with you. If you're going anywhere remote, if you're going camping, if you're going hiking or canoeing, you definitely want to make sure that you have a good supply with you. You don't want to find yourself without low supplies. If you're traveling, like I said, getting a letter of prescription, as well as a letter from your team is quite handy. I always get one. I don't think I've ever had to show it at security or in the airports, but it's nice knowing that I have it in my back pocket. And some companies also offer loaner pumps. Not every company will be able to do it at every time that a request comes in, but definitely ask about it. So if you're on a pump, let's say you're going, I don't know, to the Caribbean for 2 weeks, see if perhaps you can get a pump, replacement pump, just in case something were to happen to your first pump. And also in that regard, I would say write down on a piece of paper or take a picture of your settings of your pump. In case something were to happen to it. You don't want all of a sudden have your pump die and then you get a new loaner pump and you have no idea what to input into your new pump. So just kind of keep that handy somewhere. Okay, so next, talking about glycemic targets in the summer. And this is something that you may or may not kind of feel comfortable doing, but often our summer does come with added challenges, right? Whether it's going low from exercise, going low from the heat, right? Heat kind of dilates our blood vessels and often makes us go low. Although it can also dehydrate you. And when you're dehydrated, your blood sugars actually go up. So in true type 1 fashion, we can both see low blood sugars and high blood sugars from an event this time, when I'm talking about hot days. So something that you can do is change your goals and change your targets or those of your children. You can look at time and range goals. So if you're on a Dexcom, you might know that you can set the range. I believe the default is 3.9 to 10 millimoles. Let's say in the summer, you feel like that might be a little bit tricky for you to hit. Maybe you want to increase it a little bit to 4.5 to 11, for example. And that's something you can chat about with your healthcare team. Adjusting your A1C goal. Your A1C is the average glucose over 2 to 3 months. If you're off for 2 to 3 months in the summer and you want to adjust your goal, you can adjust it both ways. Let's say you're super active and you're wanting to set yourself a goal of lowering your A1C and doing a lot of these great healthy habits. Maybe it's the time to lower your A1C goal, right, and go after it. Or on the other hand, if that stresses you or stresses your child, then maybe the summer is a time to be a little more relaxed, right, and raise that goal. You can also have different basal rates and different carb ratios. So in the summer, often, like I said, there are more parties, more barbecues. A lot of that food is quite heavy, right? And we know that when we eat food that has more fat, more protein, especially the fat, we become more insulin resistant. And you may have noticed that with foods like pizza, spaghetti, hot dogs, hamburgers. We sometimes need to give additional insulin, whether at the time of the meal or sometimes as an extended bolus, right? Some of you might use an extended bolus, which is to say that, let's say you need 6 units for your dinner. If you eat something like a pizza, you'll do an extended bolus. You'll give 3 at the time that you eat. And then your pump automatically will give you 3, let's say 2 hours later when the food is really starting to get digested. Meeting with a dietitian never hurts. And getting started on a CGM is really, really helpful. You can test more often as well if you don't have a CGM. Even doing more finger pricks and learning trends for yourself it can be helpful. Staying hydrated, like I said, super important. Whether you're have a high blood sugar or not, when you have a high blood sugar, I would say even more important, right, to stay hydrated. And wearing sunscreen, again, a bit of a given when it comes to a health tip for the summer, but with type 1s especially, a sunburn can act as a stressor to your body, which can cause you to go high from kind of like the stress reaction. So another point for sunscreen. Okay, now exercise and physical activity. So I think many of you probably are more active in the summer. I think as Canadians, it's just a lot easier, right, to get outdoors and be active, whether that's in a kind of organized fashion, whether you say play soccer with a team, if you're on a swim team, if your child is involved at summer camp, they're incredibly active and they probably see their insulin needs drop significantly. And we need to drive home this point that exercise, although it does come with challenges with low blood sugars, it's so beneficial, right? It's so beneficial for both your blood sugar management, for your heart, your lung health, and also reducing any complications, right? Both in the short term, but also in the long term. There's lots of really great research looking at how exercise can improve our health, whether you live with type 1 or not. Also improving your mental health, right? That's a big one, I think, for anyone living with a chronic disease. And a caretaker, right? If you're a parent of a child with type 1, I would say, include yourself in that physical activity, right? And get out there and move with your children. The guidelines right now tell us to aim for 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous intense activity. So that's really where you kind of start to huff and puff. That's about a 6 out of 10 in terms of effort, spread over at least 3 days of the week. If you see that and you think, oh goodness, that's way more than I'm doing. I'm aiming for 20 to 40 minutes a week, or my child is only doing 1 hour a week of gymnastics. Start where you are, right, and incrementally go up if you can. We want to be consistent, right? We want to do something that is realistic for our lives. So start where you are and then aim to go up. Now, why might you be fearful of exercise? I think this is something that we all know. It's incredibly complex to manage our type 1 diabetes and manage our blood sugars when it comes to exercise. In the next slide, I think I have 2 slides about it. I'll talk a little bit about the types of exercise and how not all exercise is the same, right? And you may have noticed that already, that if someone is swimming or running or walking even, you might drop very quickly. Versus if your child or you are into weightlifting or CrossFit or track and field, you might not actually go low, you might actually go up, right? So I'll talk about that. The timing of the exercise, are you doing it first thing in the morning when you have not had your breakfast yet, right? When you're fasted? How much insulin on board do you have? So if you're on an insulin pump, the IOB is insulin on board. It's just how much active insulin is in your body, right? The more you have, let's say it's right after lunch, you still have active insulin, you most likely will have a higher risk of going low. And then a few other things, practice versus a game, right? A practice might not be as stressful. A practice, you might go low versus a game, you have so much adrenaline, right? That is circulating in your body. You might actually find your blood sugar going up. So you might need 2 different strategies when it comes to your insulin. And then individual trends, because I always throw that in because we all know that we're different and one thing might work for one of us and not for someone else. Okay, this is a really great diagram that I love sharing with the community, and it's a study funded by us called the Better Registry out of Quebec, out of Montreal. And here what they did is they just kind of divided nicely in a visual way the way that the blood sugar evolves and changes with different activities. So I'll just start on the left and go right. I won't go into too much detail because I think Ruth said this will be on YouTube and then shared with you as well, so you can go back to it. But generally speaking, if you're doing something that's more aerobic or cardiovascular, so this is where you're huffing and puffing, right? You're sweating, really kind of having difficulty speaking. We're talking about running, biking, swimming. You'll see your blood sugar go down both during the activity, but also after, and it can be many hours after, and you may have noticed that, right? So here you want to make sure that both during the activity, you're careful to either eat more or give less insulin, as well as after the fact. So many hours later, if you're on a pump, you'll have to probably decrease your basal. You might be doing this already intuitively, or eat more for that kind of dinner pre-bed, right? Or have a snack before bed with a bit of protein and fat. Yep. Oh, okay. I think someone is just chatting. Okay. The next one is interval. So in purple. So this is more of like a a stop and go, right? So here you have sports like hockey, basketball, interval training. And what you might see is that you can either be pretty stable during, you might go down a little bit, but you still have the risk of going low after, right? So if you're playing basketball, because it's stop and go, you can be steady throughout. You don't necessarily have to change your insulin for the actual game, but you still have to be cognizant that after the fact, you might go low, and so you might want to change your insulin. And then the last two, resistance and maximal, this is where I kind of spoke about, strength training, CrossFit, weightlifting. Here you're really using, if you think about it, your muscles more than your heart and your lungs. And as soon as you make that shift from aerobic to anaerobic, right, the way that our body utilizes energy changes. And because of that, we actually risk going up both during the activity as well as after the activity. And you may find that on top of these types of exercises making you go up, if you're doing it first thing in the morning, if you're doing a CrossFit class first thing in the morning and you're fasted, you have no insulin on board, then you definitely have to give yourself insulin before you head out the door for that activity, which can be counterintuitive, right? If you kind of have this idea that exercise will always make you go low. Now, this I kind of spoke to. I'm not going to go here into detail. I just find it's a lot of great information that you can kind of come back to. If you look on the left where it says considerations, this is taken from a study by, again, Mike Riddell out of York University. He gives you kind of two main examples of where you might find yourself when it comes to insulin in your body. You might find yourself in a position where you have relative hyperinsulinemia. So just meaning you have a lot of insulin on board, right? So that could be right after lunch, for instance, you still have insulin. And during prolonged exercise. So you're like, okay, I just had lunch. I want to be spontaneous and I want to go out for a run now. What do I do knowing that I have insulin on board? And this is where you really have to cut your insulin. If you're on a pump, you can cut your basal, right? If you're on insulin pens, so MDI is multiple daily injections. If you're on insulin pens, you do probably have to eat during that workout. And again, kind of choose foods that are a little bit more easy to digest. So simple sugars, right, are easier than those kind of, like I said, heavy, protein bars or whatnot. And then in the second consideration, so again, on the left column where it says relative hypoinsulinemia. So these are moments when you both have less insulin on board. So it could be first thing in the morning when you're fasted. And this is where you're doing intensive exercise. So if you remember the intensive exercise, I'll go back, is the two last ones on the right, the resistance and the maximum, where you have a risk of having high blood sugars, right? So you have little insulin, hypoinsulinemia, and you have intense exercise that can make you go up. And here is where you want to make sure that you're either increasing your basal if you're able to. If you're on a insulin pen, make sure you're really hydrating well. You can potentially give yourself, half a unit or 1 unit if you find that you're constantly going high as well if you're on insulin pens. This is what I wanted to share. It just came out last week from the ADA, the American Diabetes Association, had their annual conference. And they shared, because we know that some individuals are on automated insulin delivery systems or pumps, right? These are kind of the Loop, the smart pumps like the MiniMed 7080G. The Tandem as well has an exercise mode. And what they wanted to share was, knowing that, of course, it is difficult to strategize for exercise. The benefit of these pumps is that they kind of give you that additional, automation, right? That can help you. So I pulled the table where they shared some strategies for exercise, and I don't want to read through it right now, but I just want to show you on the left where it says strategy that there are many different things that you can do if you're feeling, helpless or challenged by exercise at the moment for yourself or for your child. There are many things that you can do, and some of these, of course, are attached to these automated systems, but others aren't, right? You can kind of look at reducing your mealtime insulin. You can check your blood glucose more often, right? You can carbohydrate feed, right? So eat carbohydrates. But if you do have one of these systems, you can also tweak your exercise target. So this is where it is in the Diabetes Spectrum journal of the ADA, the American Diabetes Association, and it's free online if you want to read it. And it's fairly easy to read through. Okay, I think the last thing when it comes to exercise, I'm just checking my time, is nutrition. And I think nutritional considerations, many of you probably are challenged by this as well, and rightfully so, right? It can be incredibly complex. Some of these questions have already come up, but like, how does food impact your blood sugars before, during, and after exercise? I spoke to this idea of, treating a low blood sugar during exercise with a fast-acting sugar, right? Of course, the Dex supply now is fairly low, but simple sugar candies will do the trick. I know some people like these little bags. I forgot what they're called, but they're little fruit gummies from Costco, and you can buy individual packs of them. They're like little blue bags. Honey stinger chews are also, that's the one on the bottom right with the red and yellow. Those are pretty fast-acting as well. And doesn't matter, oh, I have a little typo there. Doesn't matter how you treat a low, and it does, because if you want something fast acting, that's great, but it will only work for, let's say 10, 15 minutes. If you're planning on going on a long bike ride, on a long hike, you have to make sure that you're eating a bit more than that, right? So make sure you plan for including some protein and some fat, however that looks, right? You can also have some complex carbs. I do a lot of cycling. I know some people who take a baked potato. It's a simple, good solid carbohydrate, and they put it in their back pocket of their cycling jersey and they go for their long bike ride. Knowing that food might impact your performance, it might also impact your gut, right? You might kind of feel a little nauseous or uneasy if you take too much of the same food. So kind of play around with it and try different things. And then lastly, the point here about treating the athlete and then the diabetes, that's just to remember that if you're being active, you're outdoors, you're being busy, and your blood sugar, let's say, is high all day, I don't want you to not eat, right? Like, we want to make sure that we're still eating and we're still treating the diabetes. But as an active individual, that active individual needs hydration, needs food, and it just might mean that you might need additional insulin. Don't forget about the diabetes, obviously, but make sure you're also fueling and eating properly. Here, I just want to bring your attention to kind of the numbers in the middle of the screen. So this is the idea that really under an hour of activity, you don't necessarily have to eat more. If you have high insulin levels, so if you're, like I said, right after a meal, then you might have to give yourself, you might have to plan for eating carbohydrates for that activity, but not always. Again, kind of, see where you're at when you start. Generally, the guidelines say if you're kind of under 8 and you're doing something that's cardiovascular, so if you're going to be doing one of those aerobic activities like swimming or running, you most likely do have to either lower your insulin or eat a little bit. And then if you're partaking in activities for more than an hour, this is where you really do want to think about what is your strategy when it comes to food. We aim for about, here there's a bit of a range, 0.4 to 1.3, but generally speaking, it's about 20 grams every 20 minutes. And it might seem like a lot to take in 60 grams for the hour, but you're being active, right? You're moving for that entire hour. So if you're right now taking in, let's say 10 or 15 grams, I wouldn't say jump from 10 or 15 to 60 right away, but maybe aim for, having an extra few bites of food in that hour if you can. And hydration, of course, again, very important. If you're someone who sweats a lot, I would say also try and get electrolytes in fairly early. If you're out for a long time, if it's a very hot day, then think about what kind of salts and electrolytes you'll be taking in as well. Okay, I'm almost done, which is good because it's 8:45. A few things just to keep in mind when it comes to outings in the summer. I think, again, kind of driving home the point about being prepared. If you're going out to a restaurant, if it's a place that you've been to or not, often we think we remember the carb count for meals. Do a quick check of the nutritional guide if you can. Most websites will have the nutritional guide online. If not, you could ask for it when you get to the restaurant. Some individuals I know in some clinics, but again, you can kind of chat with your dietitian to make sure. What they recommend is even kind of taking that number and increasing it by like 10 or 15%, the number meaning the carbohydrate count, because restaurants often make their foods with a lot of butter, a lot of oil, which makes the meal a little bit heavier. And so we do need to kind of account for that often by giving more insulin. And you may have found that already, right? That when you go out, you often are higher than what you think based on the carb count. Potentially have a drink limit, right? If you're someone who drinks alcohol and you plan to drink alcohol, look at having maybe, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is that you're comfortable with, number of drinks as a limit, so that you can remain confident in your management, and that you can also plan the intake of carbs. Many, especially mixed drinks, so cocktails, are very high in carbohydrates, right? A more simple alcoholic drink like a wine or a beer is actually a bit lower than cocktail. So just have that in mind. And then lastly, find a buddy. So this is something that doesn't have to be done every day. You know, if you may do this already. Maybe if you have a child in university, for example, you can share if you're on a CGM, your alerts, right, on your Dexcom. And what that means is that you will have access to someone else's blood sugar, looking at the alerts. I would definitely recommend talking to the individual, making sure that they're comfortable with you having that information. You can turn it on and off as well, right? So if you want to turn it on for a weekend when your child is away, and then you can turn it off when they come back home, so that they can build the confidence themselves, right, to manage their diabetes. And lastly, you know, I think summer is a great time to think about getting involved, whether that's getting involved in activities that happen in your community. We have a lot of walks that are still happening. You can actually create your own walk opportunities. So these are fundraising events that are community-based. You can look at doing, if you're a cyclist, for example, you can look at doing a ride, whether in Canada or in the US. They have a lot of really great locations in the US when it comes to JRF rides. Or you can prepare for the one that we have in the fall, which, Ruth, remind me, October 5th, I think you said last night.
In Toronto, yeah.
Oh, in Toronto, right? There's a few, but yeah, you can plan for that, right? So getting involved, like I said, if you're especially new to this community, it can be quite overwhelming. So we're a very, you know, knowledgeable, friendly group. So if you can get involved, please do. The last one is just a note about camps, because I think summer camps, there's a lot of research around the benefit of summer camps for children and youth living with not only type 1 diabetes, but with, you know, different chronic diseases. And it really has shown that this kind of experiential learning, when you learn by doing, by having experiences, right? And summer camp, of course, is a wonderful experience. It can increase your confidence in oneself, but also in managing type 1 diabetes. Most of these camps have nurses and doctors, you know, 24/7, right, who are there, increase their knowledge of diabetes management, but also can decrease diabetes related sadness, which is really important, right, when it comes to acceptance of a condition, a diagnosis, but also just kind of general, you know, the kind of overwhelming work that is involved with managing type 1. I put a link here to Diabetes Canada, because they have a lot of camps throughout the summer. You can also think about doing a family camp, for instance, either if your child is too young for sleepaway camp. They do kind of 3-4 day weekends where family can come as well and stay at the camp, which are really fun. Other opportunities to get involved are kind of day camps, or, you know, just activities within your community like soccer or swimming. And there are some adult camps as well, and adult hiking trips and canoe trips that are organized by Connected in Motion, where you have Slipstream weekends, which is really a group for adults living with type 1 diabetes. And those are both in Canada. They're based in Ontario, but they're in Canada, and they do have some in the US as well. So that's it from me. I know I shared a lot of information. Let me just unshare this, and then I can see you all and I can answer any questions.
So there were two in the chat, which I think you probably did cover, but just in case, I'll ask again.
Sure.
Stephanie just wanted to know if hotter temperatures result in the need for more basal insulin, or is the sugar response to going low having more impact? So is it that you need more insulin, or is it the glucose, or is it both?
Yeah, so good question. So it's a little bit of both, which is probably not the helpful answer, but I'll tell you how I kind of work through it. Generally speaking, in warmer weather, you are more active, and because your vessels, your blood vessels will dilate a little bit, will get a bit bigger, you do tend to go a bit lower generally, right? So you have all probably noticed you do go a bit lower over the summer when it's really hot out, and that's because of a few different factors. In terms of going high, that's really when it's quite hot out and you're either insulin is not being effective, right? Like I said, but that's again at quite high temperatures, or you're dehydrated. So the best thing you can do is making sure that you have low supplies on you and that you're well hydrated in the summer. And then you should probably, be closer to keeping steady blood sugars.
Sarah just mentioned that her son, who apparently is very active, because he'll go swimming for an hour and then go mountain biking for a couple of hours, and has actually done Ironman triathlons, so she knows how to do both of those things for those lengths of times as well. But she finds that sometimes he's going low midnight, so he's dropping hours after the activity.
Yep.
That,
is it just a comment or a question? I mean, I think the question is whether or not you decrease the basal enough at night, right? The other question there is he, and many people fall into this category where they eat a lot, they know what to eat during the activity, but during the week, are they eating enough for that level of activity, right? So kind of take an inventory of what they're eating throughout the week. If they're consistently going low, then they also need to up their protein and their fat, right? And not just their carbohydrates. So speaking with a sports dietitian, I did one full Ironman. I'm not doing any more, but I spoke with a sports dietitian because they have a really great kind of bank of knowledge to help you there.
And then Inicia, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, if you wanted to unmute yourself.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I have a fear. My daughter is 7. She was diagnosed last October. And I have a fear of when she becomes an adult, what if she gets low in her sleep and dies in her sleep and I don't live with her anymore? Type 1 diabetes people, are they encouraged to always live with someone, or can they live by themselves?
Yeah, so it's a very valid concern and fear, especially as a parent, right, with a young child. They can definitely live by themselves without question. I think the important thing to remember as a child growing up with that diagnosis is to be confident and have the knowledge, right, to live in a way that is conducive to achieving all your goals, right? So whether that's if she wants to live by herself, if she wants to go away to university, she kind of has to think about what those goals are, and then what does she have to do to make sure that she can live in a safe and healthy way. The technology that exists nowadays are phenomenal, right? So like I mentioned, if you are on one of the CGMs or an insulin pump, there are insulin pumps that will shut off if your blood sugar is too low, right? If your Dexcom or CGM that you have is too low, you won't be getting more insulin. Some people, of course, as well, who might have more difficulty with low blood sugars, they can look into even having their dogs that are trained. That can be service dogs. So that's another option. I know some people who have a low alert dog who comes and wakes them up. So yeah, you can definitely, without question, live on your own, live away from home, which maybe you might not like if they're far away eventually.
I am worried because
yeah, of
I
course.
see somebody who lived on his own and his pump it sensed a malfunction during the night while he had the low and he passed away in his sleep. And his mother did not get the alert because of
Oh, that's I'm sorry, that's terribly tragic. It's not something that we want to think about, but like I said, if you plan as best you can, right, and have those kind of resources and supports in place, then she definitely can live on her own.
Okay,
and I recommend to you the connection series that we have on the Wednesday every month, because then you can speak with other parents and it's unstructured and they can share some of their experience with you. I think you may find it helpful just to be able to connect with other parents in the community who share your experience and can help. And I'll put that information in the chat as well.
Thank you.
Question about tan. No, tanning and burning. Sorry.
Sorry.
Do you have any knowledge of the effects of insulin when someone's in the sun? Does it cause potentially tans or burns? Or Brenda's not sure if it's related to her diabetes or if it's something else.
So I'm not sure if I understand the question. Is the burn happening when insulin is injected? Is it around the injection site, or is a burn?
Sorry, it's Brenda. No, it's just she gets blotchy all over. So she'll apply her sunscreen, but like her face will be very blotchy. Like she'll get a weird burn, even though she's seemingly applied sunscreen, but she just tans very unevenly and very blotchy. Usually when we go on vacation, like in the South. I just wondered if anyone had experienced that or if you've ever experienced that yourself, Ian.
I have not, and it's not something that I'm familiar with. I can look into it and get back to you if you want to send us your contact. I could look into it, but it's not something that I'm aware of.
Sure.
In terms of a connection between type
Yeah.
1, obviously I know that it can happen.
Right.
My apologies. I've been having some challenges with Teams. I didn't realize I was glitching out. So I turned my camera off. We have time for maybe one more question because we're coming up at 9 o'clock. So was there any other questions or comments before we wrap it up? No? Okay. Oh, sorry.
I think I see Misty.
Misty,
Yeah.
you have a hand up? Sorry.
Hi again. Yeah. If my sugar's like 9.3 in the morning, is that because of stress? Or like I didn't eat much the night before, right? And then I had a low about in the morning or some like in the morning I checked it was 5.3. Then it went to 9.3 the next morning at breakfast and 9.3 at lunch. And I had a what did I have? English muffin with egg and sausage, but I put the egg without the bread, and I had the bread on the side with like cream cheese, and I had slice of cheese from work.
You know what?
Sometimes I have croissants
yeah,
at work
I have to.
because having a slice of toast, we do have bread, but they don't. I don't want peanut butter or jam, right? So I get I get a croissant and some cheese and no fruit because I'm afraid to have
Yeah.
bite.
You know what I would recommend? I mean, I would love to I would love to try and answer that question, but I just can't because there are hundreds and hundreds of different things that can cause your blood sugar, right, to be higher in the morning. I would recommend, I hope you have a healthcare team.
It lowered to 6.3 this 7.1
Okay.
on the Tuesday, then 6.3 today. And
Yeah,
lunch
I
was
can't give
5.3.
you, I wish
So
I
it's
could.
like
I
up
can't
and
answer
down. I
that.
don't know what it is. And I
Yeah.
take
Try connecting with your team if you can, because they probably will have a better sense of just kind of your blood sugars.
I have one of those sensors. And
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like going.
That's great. You can share that with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's
shared
a nice
it with
thing.
them, and I had an awful time of it. I was a diabetic since I was 18 years old.
Yeah.
My doctor said you have 1.5, type 1.5.
Yeah, we sometimes see that with type 1 diabetes, where you'll have, especially if you're an adult, you'll be diagnosed kind of in a bit of a roundabout way, right? But at the end of the day, you need to kind of have a good sense of what foods will do to your blood sugars, right? And what exercise will do to your blood sugars.
I ate a banana cheese last week and it went good at lunchtime.
Yeah, so definitely take notes, have a journal. I don't know if just because I'm just cognizant of time. Sorry, Misty. I'll just see the chat quickly.
Yeah, sorry, Misty. I just we need to wrap it up, unfortunately, because we're low on time. But I put some other resources in the chat that hopefully you'll see and that might be helpful for you. And as Anne was saying, the only thing we can ever recommend is to speak to your healthcare provider because we're just unable to provide any kind of personalized information on these type of calls. But I did really want to thank Anne so much for her presentation tonight and for giving us her time both in French and English while she is on maternity leave. And Dexcom for giving us the support tonight as well. And I hope that everybody found it informative. And we will be posting this to YouTube on Tuesday after the long weekend and sending out an email with the link as well. So check your email for that. And I hope that everybody has a really fantastic long weekend and a good rest of your night.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just, Bruce, jumping on for one question that I see here about patches, because I forgot to talk about that. To keep your CGM or your pump site on, right? Probably for your CGM Paul, I imagine. There are a few out there. I believe Dexcom has their own, if I'm not mistaken, but I do know there are quite a few. A quick Google search will give you a few options. Type in waterproof, you know, Dexcom or Libre, whichever one you have, patch, and you'll see a few that come up. It's a bit of like a, almost has like a bit of like a painter's tape texture quality to it. So it's a bit thicker. And I find it can be, from what I've heard, and I luckily don't have the issue of it coming off, but I know some people who do, and that's one that they like. And there's some people who are recommending, Sarah recommends Patcha Beats. It's a cute little name, Patcha Beats, Patches. Okay, sorry, Ruth, I just wanted to.
No, that's okay. I just cognizant of your time. You've got 2 children you need to get back to.
I
as
have
well.
2 sleeping children, so if anyone here has any questions. Sleeping for now, I probably just jinxed myself. Okay.
I think we'll wrap it
Thank
up.
you.
And we'll get this up on YouTube on Tuesday. So thank you again so much, Anne. And thank you for
You're
everyone
welcome.
joining and for the very lively chat and the participation. And I hope this helps everybody feel empowered and confident over the summer.